Good evening, nice to see you today at CMRS seminar. Today we are delighted to have Megan Hindu from the ICMPD. The ICMPD is the International Center for Migration and Policy Development. We currently have, we are collaborating together with the CMRS and the ICMPD in a research project in which today we are going to present the findings. First, I will give the floor to Megan to talk a little bit about the overall project, in which Cairo is only one part of it. And then we'll leave the floor to the researchers on this project, the CMRS researcher, who will talk about the specific project of Cairo. So let me first introduce Megan. Megan is working, as I said, at the ICMPD. She has a BA from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and an MA in Global Studies from the University of Vienna and Leipzig. Her focus was on migration and diaspora, and she particularly focused on Iraqi diaspora. Now at the CMPD, her work is on border control and border management and human rights. Then I would like to introduce our researchers. We have Sarah Sadeh. Sarah Sadeh has been with CMRS for quite a long time. She is an adjunct faculty at CMRS as well as a senior research center. She is also a PhD candidate at York University, political science. And we have also Mohammed El-Sayed, correct? He is a researcher at CMRS. His background in the area of refugee protection and the protection of human rights defender. He obtained LLM in International Human Rights in 2014 from the National University of Ireland, Galway. So Megan will first introduce the project, the overall project, which is taking place in 6 countries. And then Sarah and Mohammed will present the findings of the research in Cairo. Megan.
Thank you very much first to CMRS for hosting me here and for allowing me to come and present a bit on the broader project. First, I'm going to start with presenting the background context to migrants caught in situations of crisis in host countries. In particular, the Migrants initiative, which is a political initiative that provides the background to this research, and then to talk about our project and the emerging findings of this project. I had some copies there of our emerging findings report. It's unfortunately all gone, but now it's also available online for anyone. But I'll discuss some of the main findings and conclusions. So to give a background context, the issue of migrants caught in situations of crises in host countries has come up because in cases of crises, migrants often fall through the cracks or gaps in particular protection frameworks when there's a conflict or a natural disaster. The Libya crisis of 2011 is the prime example of this. And it is when also the international community realized the particular vulnerability of migrants caught in such crises, although there are, of course, previous examples. For example, the Gulf War of 1990. But this was the moment after which the international community realized the need to respond to this issue and made it a priority to address it. In particular through the Migrants initiative. The Migrants initiative was launched by the Philippines and the US, and IOM serves as its secretariat. The main goal of the Migrants initiative has been to produce voluntary and non-binding guidelines for states and other actors on how to best respond to migrants when they're caught in situations of crisis. They are available now. They were released in May 2016. So who is covered by the Migrants initiative? Migrants, when we speak about migrants, we're speaking about non-nationals and non-citizens who are present in a country affected by crisis and who do not benefit from international protection as refugees. So that's an important issue, is that refugees are explicitly not included in this definition because there is an international framework that applies to them. It is a separate question about how that framework works and whether de facto protection is available, but for the purpose of this initiative, they aren't included, except to the extent that they are secondarily displaced. So refugees for example, Libyan refugees from 2011 crisis would not be covered because they would be primarily displaced, but refugees who were in Libya before and were displaced a second time would be covered because they suffer from similar issues or have similar protection issues to other migrants. Internally displaced persons are also not included. What do we mean also by crisis? The initiative focuses on two types of acute humanitarian crises. The first is natural disasters, so hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, and floods. And the second is conflict, so civil unrest, generalized violence, and armed conflict. As I said before, the main goal, objective of this initiative was to produce the guidelines. They're available, they were released in May and also presented again in the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, where also with the New York Declaration, we see the specific mention of the need to address migrants displaced by crises, and the New York Declaration mentions the MIPIC initiative. So now to talk specifically about our project, where we're all involved. This is an EU-funded project to support the MIPIC initiative, and it shares the same overall objective and goals. It does this in three ways, in three interrelated components. So the first is regional consultations, which were organized between 2015 and 2016, and in 6 regions: Asia, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, West and Central Africa, Latin America, East and Southern Africa, the Middle East and North Africa. And these consultations were about discussing lessons learned and best practices and experiences on how governments and other stakeholders responded to migrants caught in such crises. So, for example, consular emergency plans, border agency cooperation, evacuation of migrants, and the role of the diaspora. The second component where we're involved is the research component. The research component is focused on addressing some of the shortcomings at the moment in data and research on migrants and countries of crisis. And our focus is on long-term implications of such situations of crisis. We conduct the research in partnership with IMI, the International Migration Institute at the University of Oxford, as well as local partners in each of the fieldwork countries. We have 6 case studies, and we are conducting fieldwork in 12 different countries of origin, transit, and destination. One of which is AUC, who will speak more about Egyptian returnees from Libya. The third component is the capacity building component, which is building on the results of the first 2, of the consultations and the research. So to speak more about the research, these are our 6 case studies. Côte d'Ivoire is focusing on the political unrest of 2002 to 2003 and 2010 to 2011, particularly xenophobic violence, and looks at returnees to Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Liberia. Lebanon is looking at the impact of the 2006 crisis, and particularly on migrant domestic workers, and fieldwork was conducted in Lebanon. South Africa looks at the xenophobic violence between 2008 and 2015, and the research is conducted in Zimbabwe and in South Africa. Libya is our largest case study, and is with fieldwork. 2011 is the particular focus, with fieldwork conducted in six countries, 5 of which are countries of origin: Burkina Faso, Chad, Egypt, Ghana, and Niger. And the 6th, Tunisia, is focusing on, although it is a country of return, it's focused, in this study we're looking at stranded migrants, so people who were stranded in the country after the crisis. Thailand, we're looking at the floods in 2011. Fieldwork was conducted in Thailand. And the Central African Republic, we're looking at the political unrest of 2013 and 2014, with fieldwork conducted in Cameroon and Chad. The research I'm presenting at the moment is in progress. So it's based on over 500 interviews as of August this year, and some of the main things that we've seen coming out there. It's talking about how migrants responded to crisis, what were the main factors at play when they in the medium and long term, and also policy responses. These are two quotes from interviews in Ghana and Lebanon. I'm not going to read them because I know I'll run out of time. But the first is discussing some of the economic impact of unplanned return due to such crises, where you have to leave behind and you lose a large portion of your savings sometimes, for some migrants. The second is looking at learning as a result of the crisis. So how migrants have learned from it and built up their communities themselves because of or to a certain extent because of the crisis, because of what they've realized because of the crisis. I want to talk about contextual factors first, because migrants' positioning within the larger host country and society prior to the crisis has had a very important impact on the options available to them during the crisis. So this is legal status, socioeconomic position, and migration history. So when I say migration history, it's both the conditions of their arrival in the host country and also the conditions of their departure from their country of origin. This can be, for example, regarding the latter, when migrants or refugees have left their country of origin due to violence. This may have an impact on their access to the labor market and also services in their host country. Cultural affinities are an important factor. For example, we saw in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, a lot of the communities along the border have cultural affinities, speak similar languages, similar backgrounds, and for Liberian refugees during the Liberian War, as well as Ivorian refugees, this was important for them in terms of their movement across the border during these crises. Employment prospects abroad has been actually, though, the most important factor for why migrants move. So that is, I should have started with that, but that is the most important factor, and the other ones also shape where people go. Common languages is also a very important factor. For example, in Thailand, Laotian migrants that speak Lao are better able to negotiate their salaries, they have better access to jobs, for example, as opposed to, for example, migrant domestic workers in Lebanon. This is aside from the legal framework and issues that are at play there, but languages are an important hindrance or a positive factor. I want to speak a little bit also about the legal status. Legal status is a very important factor because precarious legal status or exclusion from certain legal protections has been the most significant negative factor pre-crisis. Irregularity of migrants has led to detention, deportation, and when a crisis hits, this can be exacerbated in extreme ways. This also is relevant in terms of lack of information and data on migrants when a crisis happens. So there isn't information on where irregular migrants are, how many there are, what kind of services they need, and so on and so forth, which can limit the impact of an emergency or evacuation procedures. One example of this is Thailand. For example, they had several regularization processes, and their regularization is tied to location. So for migrants, irregular migrants, their regularization is tied to their location. So during the floods, migrants didn't want to leave their location for fear, despite the fact that they were in danger, because they were afraid that they would lose on the regularization process. They would lose their regular status. On the other hand, migrants have also, that we've spoken to throughout the research, have also navigated these issues related to legal status in interesting ways. For example, in Chad, returnees from the Central African Republic, who they had been in the Central African Republic for decades, sometimes generations. And when they returned to Chad, they registered as returnees. However, later on, they registered as refugees in order to access services that they were in dire need of and that were not available to them as returnees. So that's one example of navigating these legal statuses. Now I want to speak briefly to the immediate and longer-term responses of migrants when a crisis hits. So in the immediate term, migrants have to decide whether they are going to stay or whether they're going to relocate and return. If they stay, of course, the most important thing is to find shelter, and churches have been important, embassies, bridges, staying at home or inside as much as possible. A lot of times, neighbors, friends, and sometimes nationals in the host country have been particularly important for this. For example, employers and landlords. They can. There was examples in Thailand of employers providing shelter to migrants at their place of work, or for example, landlords allowing migrants to move to higher apartments in the building, or on the opposite side, charging them extra in order to do so. Information is very important here, and that's where also the issue of language comes in again. For those migrants who speak the local language or understand it, they're much more prepared and understand what's going on. Second, the option is relocation and return. So this is not, though, always to the home country. For example, in Tunisia, we're talking about stranded migrants in a third country, and it's also not necessarily to the home community. So, for example, in Chad, some returnees went to rural areas which they were not familiar with, and some also went to the capital, N'Djamena, despite also not being familiar with it. So this is also another example that migrants do not necessarily return to their home community, and there's certain limitations related to that. However, in the immediate term, it's also about sharing the costs of this. So either within the country, for example, getting to an evacuation center within Libya, or getting to Tunisia, or getting from, for example, Cairo to your home community, which I think you'll probably speak a bit more to. Another issue about relocation and return is also the importance, again, of host nationals, friends in the host and home country, and family. On the one hand, financially covering the cost of return, when it's not covered by, for example, international organizations or civil society. And also, in some cases, gaining access to identity documents. This was the case in Cameroon. Cameroonian migrants to Central African Republic left their ID documents in Cameroon. And so during the crisis, their families sent drivers to the Central African Republic with their ID documents so that Cameroonian migrants could access evacuation services. Social and mass media is extremely important in some cases. For example, in Ghana during the Libya crisis, some radio channels were publishing for radio, disseminating stories about Ghanaian migrants caught in Libya. And that pushed the general public, or brought about awareness to the general public, and pushed also the authorities to respond to their migrants in Libya. The third option is more in the longer term. In some cases, we saw also the example of remigration. So I think we'll probably touch on the issue of Egyptians remigrating to Libya, or assessing the possibility of migrating elsewhere, and then getting caught in another crisis in 2015. You have the example of Thailand. Those who did return to their home countries did so very short term and then went immediately back to Thailand. For Chadians, they returned to the Central African Republic in order to manage properties they left behind. Also to speak to the economic and social impacts. We saw the quote before about the loss of assets and remittance income, reduced household income, this can have an important impact on the family economy. There's an important also impact on unemployment when migrants return to regions of high migration to the crisis country. That increases levels of unemployment in that region. But on the other hand, also what savings could be brought back are then channeled into new enterprises, like we saw with the Ghanaian migrant returning from Libya. In terms of social impact, there are a lot of examples throughout the research of tension between spouses, particularly as a result of, in some cases it's linked by migrants themselves to the loss of income, loss of work, and reprioritizing then the family income. Another very important issue is psychosocial issues that are stemming from traumatic experiences. A lot of migrants are returning from violent situations, and they have psychosocial issues stemming from that. This can be, on the one hand, traumatic experiences related to generalized violence, but also in many cases that we looked at, there was specific xenophobic targeting of migrants. For example, Nigerians in Libya. In this case, actually, Nigerians, when they were being evacuated, they stated their nationality as Malian because they were so afraid of stating their own nationality.